I'm 33 years old, and for the past 3 years I haven't had any contact with my parents. The reason behind this rift stems from my younger brother, who a couple of years ago convinced our parents to pull out of investing in my business at the very last minute. This left me without the financial support I needed after I had already taken the leap of quitting my job. To put it bluntly, I have strong feelings of dislike toward my brother. This sentiment isn't solely because of what happened with the business. It's rooted in a long-standing sense that my parents favored him over me. He was always seen as the golden child, while I often felt like I was just whatever to them. Being from an immigrant family, our culture tends to place men on a pedestal. This dynamic meant that equality between my brother and me was never a reality. From a young age, it was clear that he would always be prioritized over me. My parents are extremely traditional. They think that the only duties of a woman are the ones related to household chores, marriage, and babies. That is it. I've always known that they had been expecting a son as the first kid, but they got me instead. I wouldn't say that they were outright cruel to me, but it was very obvious that there was a certain bias when it came to my brother and me. That bias was always in his favor. It would probably help the situation if my brother wasn't a huge jerk, but unfortunately he was. He had always known that my parents would love him more than me no matter what, and he shamelessly used that to his advantage. He would constantly hog the limelight whenever I achieved something and make sure that every day was about him. Just an example of his attention-seeking behavior. On my 18th birthday, he decided to announce that he was dating a college senior and was planning on dropping out of high school to live with her. Now, obviously, that would send any parent into hysteria, and that's exactly what happened. Not to mention the friends and relatives who were present at the party and heard his crazy announcement. None of that ended up being true, but it didn't matter because he had already ruined my birthday. So you guys can probably imagine what kind of person he was. He was a horrible human being, and I despise him to this day. I swear, once I moved out for college, I never looked back and didn't come back home unless and until it was absolutely necessary for me. My parents also didn't seem to miss me much. They had their golden child with them, and that's all that mattered. Even when he moved out to start college, he got a bigger goodbye than I did. My farewell party only had my family and a couple of my friends, but for him, they put together a huge bash and invited everybody that they knew. They even rented out a proper restaurant to celebrate that occasion. I didn't have any hopes for my parents, and I knew that once I was an adult, I was on my own. There was no way that they would ever want to spend any sort of money on me. The only reason that they were even paying for me to go to college was because they could, since my dad was pretty rich. I was actually pretty glad that they were financially well off because to them, sending me to college was a huge waste of money. Since I was only supposed to get married and have a family once I graduated, but I had begged them to let me go and said that if they did, I would be eternally grateful to them. I guess having some sort of control over me is what made them pay for me to go to college. That's just my guess, though, but I'm sure that it might be pretty accurate. Anyway, I graduated from business school, and I was a really great student, so it wasn't hard for me to find a job soon after. Once I started earning, I told my parents that I would pay them back the entire amount eventually, but I wasn't getting it anytime soon. They were kind of disappointed because they had actually believed I was going to start looking for prospective husbands just after I graduated. So I could settle down and have a family. My mother was actually still opposed to the idea of me working and said that it was much safer for me to just start looking for a guy and get married, because if I got older and richer, then no guy would ever want to marry me. Yeah, I know it sounds like a nightmare, and it pretty much was, but that's exactly how my parents are. I don't know why they are that way. I'm guessing they were just raised to be like that, but you can always unlearn stuff. I guess they never bothered to. But I explained to my mother that times were changing, and it was more important for me to be independent than to have a family. They were mad at me for a few weeks, but when they realized it didn't affect me in any capacity, they went back to normal, and we were back to having a civil relationship. I had already started paying them back at that point, since I had a stable job and decent income after working for a few years and living frugally. I managed to pay off my entire debt, and after that, I didn't really see a point in trying to have a cordial relationship with my parents anymore because, to me, it was clearer than ever that my brother was their only priority. We would occasionally meet for lunches or maybe run into each other at family gatherings before, but once my debt was paid off, I started staying with them less. I always found it very suffocating to be around them since they would constantly pressure me into looking for husbands and getting married as soon as I could, so I started reducing my visits to their house. Another reason for that was also because whenever we would meet, they would constantly be bragging about my brother. He had also graduated from business school, but he was nowhere as close to me. He was a terrible student from what I knew and had wasted his years partying away, so I don't know what my parents were bragging about. It was just annoying because they never bragged about me, even though I was in a much higher position than him and was earning a lot more. My brother hadn't even been able to find a job on his own, and my dad had to hire him, which was basically just an obligation. He could literally not do any work, and he would still get paid. So I don't think there was anything very tough or brag-worthy about it. But anyway, I was used to being treated like that by my parents, so it was not surprising in the slightest. The only reason I had ever even stayed in touch with them was because I owed them money, and it felt weird not to be on talking terms. But after that was done, I started focusing more on my own work, and they didn't try to get me to meet with them more often either, so we sort of grew apart. But then a couple of years later, a coworker of mine and I started brainstorming and decided to start a business of our own. After a lot of deliberation, he and I worked out everything. Before I even approached my parents, we had a proper business plan and everything because I wasn't going to go up to my parents as their daughter, but as a potential businesswoman asking for an investment. At the time, my parents and I were barely speaking. It had been really awkward for me to go up to them to ask for money, but I knew that my dad was at least a brilliant businessman and his acumen would really help us. My partner also thought that was a great idea. Most importantly, they were our safest bet. So I approached my parents to ask them for an investment, and they were actually pretty impressed with whatever my partner and I had come up with. They didn't find it awkward at all that I had come to them for business purposes after years of being distant from them. They knew and respected the fact that this was purely transactional. I don't think they would have even agreed to invest in my business if it hadn't been a brilliant idea. I think it's pretty obvious that they didn't care that I was their daughter, but my dad did like the sound of making more money, which is why he agreed. Unfortunately, it had been a verbal agreement, and he said that he would only get the legal paperwork done and stuff after his lawyers did the due diligence, and we had come up with something more tangible. So for months, my partner and I continued to work at our jobs while also working on our business alongside it. Because we had a couple of potential investors, but my parents were willing to make the biggest investment and contribute the most. So to impress them and keep them on board, we had to work really hard. It took us a couple of months, but after almost 75% of the work was done, I approached my father again. He said that he was impressed and that he would finally agree to the paperwork. My partner and I put in our 2 weeks' notice literally one day after my dad said that he would be investing and writing us a check soon. But that never materialized because just a couple of days later, my parents called me back to their house. They said that they had reconsidered everything and were not willing to invest in my business anymore. I still remember that conversation, and I remember feeling like the world had come to an end because I couldn't believe that they were hanging me out to dry like that. When I asked them why exactly they didn't think it was a good idea anymore, because up until a week ago they had been quite on board with it, I knew that there was something fishy going on. I had to get to the bottom of it, so I pushed them until they finally told me. They had spoken to my brother, and he was the one who had told them that he didn't think my business was investable and that it was going to fail. So my father was backing out solely based on his word. I was shocked, so I asked them why hadn't my brother said anything about this before. My dad told me that apparently my brother had been thinking about it for quite some time, but he wanted to see what exactly I would come up with before he came to a decision. I instantly realized that my brother hadn't been thinking about this. He had only been thinking about how devastating it would be for me if he decided to sabotage me at the very last minute. That's exactly what he had done, like a nasty little conniving snake. He had waited until I had done most of the work to tell my dad that he thought this was a bad idea and was going to fail. So my dad would back out and I would be completely screwed. I threw a fit at my parents' house that day and told them to go jump off a cliff. I said a lot of other horrible things about them and my brother, and then went back home to regroup and think about what I was going to do next, because I had my partner counting on me as well, and I couldn't let him down. I explained what had happened and felt devastated. He comforted me, suggesting we could retract our resignations if the company would take us back. However, I had already committed to leaving and wasn't willing to reconsider. Instead, I began searching for new investors. Securing funding was crucial because our ambitious ideas exceeded our personal savings. We pitched our business concept tirelessly to anyone who would listen. After a few weeks of effort, we successfully attracted a couple of investors who provided the much-needed funding. With the funds secured, we embarked on building our business from scratch. The initial months were incredibly challenging with long hours and many sleepless nights. We often questioned our decisions and wondered if our efforts would pay off. Despite these doubts, we achieved profitability shortly thereafter. Since then, we've been going really strong. There has been no looking back, and it's all thanks to me and my partner and the amount of hard work that we put into this. It was quite simple because we had faith in our idea and ourselves, and we knew that we could do this. So my brother, in spite of his very cunning plan, couldn't stop us because it was in my destiny to be successful, and there was no way he was going to stop me. The only good thing that came out of it was that I no longer had to pretend to be on good terms with my family and entertain their BS. I already knew their true colors, but I had still been willing to give them a chance and let them invest in my business because I thought that my parents would be my safest bet. But I forgot just how evil they were and how conniving my brother was. They did not deserve to be a part of this, and I'm glad that they didn't invest because I would hate for them to be a part of my success story. They never even apologized for letting me down at the very last minute, and we never spoke after I stormed out of their house that day. I'm lucky glad that they didn't reach out to me after that because I don't even know what I would say to them. However, recently they got back in touch with me because they wanted to invest in my business. Of course, now that we are doing well, everybody wants to be a part of this. It happened a few days ago, on a Sunday, so I was at home when they showed up at my place. I have been living in the same apartment ever since I graduated from college, so it was pretty easy for them to find me. When I saw them standing outside my door, I was quite taken aback because I couldn't imagine them having anything to say to me after so long. I mean, it had been almost 3 years since the incident, and they had never even tried to get back to me after that. I still opened the door and let them in because I thought that they were going to apologize to me and try to make amends with me. Some crazy part of me thought that they were here to actually make things right with me, but I was wrong. They were only here to say that they finally knew that I was doing well, and they now thought that my business was something that they could be a part of. They wanted to come on board as investors. They didn't even try to make small talk with me or ask me what I was doing. They just got to the point. I kind of appreciated that because at least they didn't waste any time and make me think that they were going to make things right. But it was just so funny to me how optimistic they were about this. From the looks of it, I had deduced that they really expected me to just agree with them and let them come on board. I just laughed in their faces and told them that that wasn't happening, so they could leave now because we had nothing more to discuss. My father looked really shocked when I told him that, and he started to struggle to find words to explain what he was feeling. He went completely red in the face and said that I had no right to insult him like this because apparently he was my father and I had to treat him with respect, even though they had never treated me with anything remotely similar all my life. So I told them that I was showing them the exact same amount of respect that they had shown me all those years ago, especially since he was here as an investor and a businessman, not as my father. My parents were pretty scandalized, and I could tell that they wanted to argue with me, but I wasn't in the mood to entertain it. So I told them to leave and said that I didn't want any investment from them, and we were good. My mother started crying and said that she had always known that letting me go to college would backfire one day, but she just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about, but I just wanted them to go away, so I told them to leave once more. But they refused to move, and instead my mother continued to cry on my couch while whining about how I had embarrassed them. She told my father that if he had just not paid for me to go to college, then I wouldn't have gotten a big head and I would have done whatever they had asked me to. Apparently, she believed that letting me go to college had been a mistake and allowing me to work had been an even bigger mistake because apparently that's what had made me so arrogant and proud. Now she thought that if I had not done any of it and just started looking for a husband, then I would have had a family by now. But instead of that, I'm still single in my 30s and will probably never have a husband or kids. She blamed my father for all of this and said that he never should have entertained the idea of investing in my business just to get me to listen to them. So at that point, I realized that they were back here only because they wanted to obey their orders once again. They did not care about me or my business. They only cared about appearances, and it was obviously really bad for their reputation that I was still unmarried and didn't have any kids of my own. They were arguing in the living room right in front of me like I wasn't even there. After a while, I had enough, so I told them to get up and get out or I would call the cops. My mother started crying even more hysterically at that point, screaming about how it was just so wrong for me to even imagine threatening my own parents by saying that I would call the cops. I was getting really impatient and I couldn't deal with this anymore, so I got up and physically removed my parents from my apartment. I work out and I'm pretty tall. It also helps that my parents didn't see that coming and were caught completely unaware, so it was really easy for me to push them out of my apartment and slam the door shut. They left after that, and I thought that it was over, but I received a call from my brother a couple of hours later, and he was furious. He was actually threatening to sue because he claimed I had physically harmed my parents and that I owe them an apology because this was no way to behave with the people who had raised me and made me capable of getting to this position in the first place. I thought it was ridiculous because I had been quite gentle with them, and I don't think they got hurt. I also don't think that it's illegal for anyone to push people out of their own apartments, but the family is all up in arms against me right now, and they say that they are going to sue me if I don't apologize. I cannot figure out what they're so mad about, but they are, and it's really tiring to deal with all the hate. I don't understand what to do right now. AITA for physically pushing my parents out of my house? Update. Hey guys, it's been a week since my parents visited me and I kicked them out of my house, and my brother went on a moral police on me. My relatives have started a full-blown hate campaign against me online, and it's been a difficult week for me. At first, I had just been considering apologizing to them for the sake of it, so I wouldn't have to deal with all the hate, and they would finally stop targeting me. But then I spoke to my partner, and I also read the comments here, and I realized that this was never going to stop even if I did apologize. They would just find something else to hate me for. There was another good point about how apologizing would actually make it easier for them to file a lawsuit, because that could be treated as an admission of guilt. So apologizing is off the table for now, and I think the only thing that I can do right now is to block them all, and hope that it all dies down soon because I really can't take the stress. I would also like to address certain things in this update since many people had asked me why I had continued to keep in touch with them for so long, even after they had treated me badly my entire childhood. To be honest, I don't really have an answer for that. I guess it was just nice to have a family because, like I said in my original post, they were not really outright cruel to me all the time. We did have a few good moments, and that's what I stayed for, I guess. Mind you, I'm just talking about my parents right now. My brother and I never had a relationship, and I'm glad that I got rid of him. He is literally the devil in human form, but I think you guys already might have figured that one out on your own. The way he screwed me over before I even started my own business by getting our parents to back out when all the work was already done was pure evil genius. I have to applaud him for it because I don't think anybody else would have been able to come up with such a devastatingly cruel plan and try to ruin someone else's life just because they can. Update 1. So I decided to speak to my partner about what I wanted to do next regarding my parents and stuff. I was honestly just afraid that the posts that my relatives were making would somehow reach my business associates, and that would be really bad for us. I was scared that it would somehow negatively impact our image, but he told me that I should just ignore it and pretend that it never happened, and that it would get all my relatives to stop hating me eventually. Surely they have lives of their own as well, and when they realize that this is not bothering me, they will go back to whatever they were doing instead of constantly trying to get on my nerves. And I think he has a point, so that's what I'm going to do. A lot of you wanted me to make a post of my own or try to respond to them in whatever way. And while I appreciate the help, I don't think I need it right now because that would just lead to more drama. I just want to focus on my work and move on with my life, and that won't be possible if I'm constantly getting in trouble. Even though getting in trouble with them doesn't really mean much to me, it's still distracting and I don't need that right now. Update 2. In other news, since my brother contacted me from a different number because I had blocked him 3 years ago, I decided to find out what he had been up to since then. I had told all my friends that I didn't want to hear about him anymore when I cut my family off, but now I'm kind of interested. So the last time that I heard of him from my friends was just after the fight that I had with my parents, and I told them not to tell me about my family back then. My brother was still working under my parents in my dad's company. I recently asked a couple of my friends if they knew what he had been up to, and they told me that he was still working there, which is just crazy because in all these years he hasn't been able to move out of the same position. And that's kind of pathetic. They also told me that my dad's company was about to be acquired, and that could be one of the reasons why he had approached me, because he just wanted to be a part of something without feeling completely useless. Also, of course, what my mother said about wanting to keep me under control would be relatively easy if they had a stake in my business or worse, a majority stake. But whatever, that's none of my business. I just wanted to know because I was kind of curious. They can do whatever they want. Update 3. It's been close to a month since I posted here first, and I did post a couple of updates in the next few days, but after that I got really busy and there wasn't much that I had to say since my relatives stopped with their hate campaign against me when they realized that I wasn't going to respond to it. My parents and my brother didn't try to reach out to me after that since I guess it was very obvious that I wasn't going to apologize. I didn't even have anything to apologize for. I just did what anybody in their right mind would have done. So yeah, that's it with my family. My dad's company got acquired, by the way. I heard about it a couple of days ago from a friend of mine, and they made a pretty big deal out of it. They posted about it and even threw a party to celebrate because it was apparently a big move. But I don't know if they realize that this does mean that there is a very real chance that my brother might end up losing his job in the long run. I can't imagine him being competent, and the only reason he even has the job that he has now is because my dad was in charge. But once that changes, it's anybody's guess. It'll be quite interesting when or maybe if he gets laid off, and I would love to be there to find out how they feel about it. I admit it's not right to take pleasure in someone else's failure, but I can't deny the satisfaction I'd feel if my brother stumbled. Until then, he can watch as I continue to thrive. I hope they're keeping tabs on me because I'm only going to grow more successful and wealthier. They better be ready. On a lighter note, many of you have asked if my partner and I are more than friends. It's sweet that people see romance everywhere, but he and I are just good pals. I do have a boyfriend, though, and we've been together for a few years now. I hadn't mentioned him before because I didn't think it mattered, and with everything going on with my parents' mess, it slipped my mind. But yes, we've been happily together, and things are going great. My parents are clueless about us, but we're even thinking about tying the knot in a year or so. And guess who won't be on the guest list? LOL. My parents had a chance to be decent for once, but as usual,